Yo, what's up, fam? Welcome back to another episode of Prison to Promise. I'm your host, Craig Waleed. Today's guest is someone whose courage and conviction shine through every aspect of her work. It's the good sister, Anisa Sabur-Mumin. She's a dedicated advocate and organizer who's turned her personal experience with incarceration and the trauma of solitary confinement into a powerful force for justice and healing. Anisa has played a critical role in groundbreaking campaigns like Halt Solitary in New York and Unlock the Box, which work to end the use of solitary confinement across the country. Her work is rooted in lived experience, and her passion for liberation and healing is contagious. In this conversation, Anisa opens up about the turning point that propelled her from surviving the system to challenging it head on. She talks about how solitary confinement ties into broader issues of racial and gender issues, mental health, and public policy. And she offers hard-won insights into advocacy, coalition building, and staying grounded in the work. She also shares how storytelling is not only a tool for change, but a path toward empowerment for those still behind the walls. So sit back and tune in, because this is a conversation you don't want to miss. So let's dive in and let's go. Yo, first I have to say, sister, you're beautiful.
Thank you.
And I wish you could have just saw your face before you said you could press record.
One of those moments, right?
Yeah. I love those moments, when we get to just see each other for who we are, not for our title, not for our position, just seeing the natural person. But aside from that, thank you, Anisa, for joining me for this platform, Prison to Promise podcast. Just to jump in, Anisa, I do the Prison to Promise podcast to highlight stories of people who have found a pathway to their own post-incarceration success, whatever that may be. I'd really like to have more women's stories featured on the podcast, simply because I know women's issues often aren't considered when we're thinking about carceral matters.
Exactly.
And
I
so,
appreciate that. Thank you so much. I
absolutely,
think
you're
this is an honor for me to be able to be on a platform like this and to talk about my experience, right? My journey
yeah,
is what I call it, because it was a journey for me. And that's why my background actually has a photo of Angela Davis. And the t-shirt that I'm wearing is No More New Women's Prisons, right? To really highlight that women do have issues that cause them to be incarcerated, but then they are silenced. And they're so silenced that no one even knows how many women at this present moment are incarcerated across the US.
right
It's
on.
a very high number. So
And
this is why I do what I do, because I know the experiences that my sisters are facing and that they need to know that there's someone outside supporting them.
right on, right on. And we know that women have been one of the fastest growing groups of incarcerated people for maybe the last decade or so.
Little more. I've been home 21 years this year, August, right?
Wow.
And when I came home, people were being, especially women and young women, were being incarcerated at exuberant rates, right? And I think that's one of the things that really opened my eyes and my mind and my heart and spirit to do this work, because I needed to see what was happening in our communities that was causing this influx into our carceral system. And I know for me, it was trauma. A lot of us face trauma, childhood trauma, adulthood traumas that caused us to do things and be in places that we should have not been, or we could have not been if we had the right resources. Right? There was a real lack of resources in communities for women, especially women who were survivors of violence, but also substance abusers, right? Because they had no other means to actually address the issues that was happening with them, so they would turn to drugs. And that was part of my story, right?
Yes.
And so my incarceration comes from selling and using drugs, right? Selling drugs to use drugs. And they didn't understand that in the system when I got arrested. I wasn't this queen pin, if you want to call it, but this is what they kind of attached the label to me. And so I wound up giving New York State like almost 16 years of my life between incarceration and substance use and parole, probation, all of the systems that were supposed to be there to help me just didn't. It failed me. Right. 2003, when I was like basically on my way out, started to see like such a high increase of young women coming in. And then I started to see like generations, like women were doing long sentences, and then their children and then their grandchildren were coming into the system. And I knew that it was something within our communities that needed to be addressed. And so I was very fortunate because I met an organization that supported women who were incarcerated, but basically on the path to reentry, right? And they had a program that was very, I think it was really powerful because they focused on the trauma. They focused on the trauma, and then they tried to help women get housing, employment, education. And long story short, I actually was introduced to the monitoring agency in New York State, the Correctional Association of New York.
Okay.
They were just starting to, they was in their first year of their women's project coalition. So they were really trying to build a coalition around women's issues because they had started in 1994, but they wasn't getting directly impacted folks and their experiences at the table. So they started this project called Reconnect. And Reconnect was a 12-week leadership development program, but basically focused on advocacy. Really teaching you civic engagement, how to find resources in your community, how to talk about the lack of resources for people re-entering, like substance abuse programs, housing programs, and all the things that we know that women needed to be able to be successful. And so I actually took that program and did the 6 weeks. But in the 6 weeks, I was doing my own research. I did 12 weeks. I was doing research. Like every time something would come up, I would actually go to the community and talk to people, see what I can get involved in. I was really looking for employment because I had some education, right? Yeah. I graduated high school in 1976, right? And in my early years incarcerated, they allowed me to go to college, right. But they moved me around so much, I wasn't able to complete anything. And then before I left, they had removed the college programs, so I couldn't complete it. Saying that to say that when I got out and tried to apply for college because I had a felony, I couldn't go to school because I didn't have the funding and I wasn't working, right?
Again, lack of resources.
It was just one barrier after another, right? And that's why I say it was a journey because I had to really do a lot of this work myself on the ground to find the resources I needed to be able to become the person that I am today.
There were none of these resources out there, none of these agencies when you were out there doing that.
So when I got home, there were some resources, but they were male focused.
What year did you come home?
I came home in 2004.
Okay, yeah.
And they were basically male focused, right? Everything was about the men, the men, the men. And that was because while incarcerated, the men was doing amazing things. They were fighting for their rights. They was rioting. They was doing all kinds of things, and they were sticking together. It was hard to get a group of women to come together and support each other because of the way we were raised and the way that we were separated within the community. You know, to me, it was like a dog-eat-dog world. You know, if I took 2 steps forward, somebody was pulling me 3 steps back. Right? There was really no togetherness. Coming through this program, I was able to actually meet women who was on the same journey as me, who wanted the same things as me, who didn't want to go back to prison because of all the harsh, torturous practices that we had to endure while incarcerated. And so I got with this organization, and they really started to show me how my experience and my voice could actually make change. I started doing legislative meetings, like talking about the issues. We looked at health care. We looked at women who were pregnant inside. We looked at women who were survivors of violence inside. We looked at how people were re-entering, right? And what was there for them. We forced our legislature to put money into the budget to expand treatment programs, right? We fought for alternatives to keep women out of prison and out of jail and into treatment programs where they can get substance use treatment, some mental health treatment, right? All of these things. We fought for Medicaid coverage to be suspended and not terminated, because if you were actually on public assistance and got arrested, terminated your case.
Yeah, I remember
So
that.
if and when you came home, you had to go through a 45-day to 120-day period before you could get some kind of assistance to help you get back on your feet.
That's
Most
enough
people
time to
come out,
recidivate.
they come out with mental health issues,
Mhm.
can't get their medication. Physical health issues, can't get medication.
Mhm.
Diabetes,
Mhm.
high blood pressure. People was having kidney failure, heart disease. They had medication at some point in their lives, and Medicaid was paying for it. And so, yeah, it just was really heart-wrenching to see how many folks was actually recidivating, because when you couldn't get what you needed, you got what you could by doing what you knew how to do best. And that was
Absolutely.
back to the streets, right?
Absolutely.
So to help my folks not go backwards, we really started to advocate for issues within the community.
But
We
why
started
did
to
you do
bring.
this, Anisa? If I could just ask real quick, why did you become an advocate for other people coming out of prison after doing all that time versus just saying, what the hell with that? I'm about to do something else, that
Well,
doesn't have to do with prisons.
so let me say this. I am grateful to be alive, honestly. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful that I wasn't one of the people who was murdered in our system. I wasn't raped, but I was assaulted. And to know that that was happening to people who was not sentenced to be raped, murdered, or assaulted inside of our system, and to see that they were young people. I had a daughter in the community, a child. And I could see these young people as my daughter, right? And to see what happened to me, happened to them or to her, it was like, no way. And I got to say that Allah brought me through all of that to say, this is your purpose. This is why I love your title, from prison to promise, right?
Yes.
Because I made a promise to Allah, if you get me out of this is what I'll do for those I'm leaving behind.
Right on.
And this is what I've been doing, right? And when I came out, my focus was so deep into the women, right? I was everything, sisters. We gotta help them. It's no way we can leave the women in there like that, because we gotta remember the women are the backbone to the
Absolutely.
family, to the community.
Absolutely.
So let me say this: before I was incarcerated, I used to visit men who was incarcerated. I had a boyfriend, a couple of them that were incarcerated, and I used to. Let me tell you, every week we would see busloads of women and children and mothers and grandmothers get on those buses and travel across our state, visit with their loved ones, them what they need, clothes, money, whatever they needed. But when I was incarcerated, I got a couple of visits, and that was from my boyfriend at the time, grandmother, who knew that the two of us was doing time together. So she would alternate the weekend visits for us, be our kind of messenger, right? But she passed away. And so in my last 5 years, no one to visit. My mom was raising my daughter. I couldn't ask her to come out of her pocket. She was working, taking care of my child, making sure she had all her needs met, to come and spend $200-300 to bring my daughter and herself up way beyond New York City into the far beyond, call it, because
Right.
I was like 10 hours away from where I was actually living. And so this just made me really say that I understand what people are going through on the inside, and we shouldn't have to suffer like that.
That's right.
And so this is why when I found this organization, and I didn't find it on my own, I had help through the program that I came out into. The woman showed me this Reconnect flyer, and you can get a stipend, and you can, join this group, and they can help you kind of navigate the system so that you can get a job. But that's what I thought it was. But when I got there and they started really talking about advocacy and policy and legislative meetings and, civic engagement, and how even though we could not vote, we could still go and talk to our legislators. So the first thing I did was go to a Senate hearing, right? The first time ever talking to a legislature about my experience in reentry. I came home and they sent me to a shelter because the parole officer was too lazy to go to my daughter's home for hours to check in to make sure that this is where I was going to stay. So they held me a week over, and because they couldn't hold me no longer, they just sent me to a shelter. This shelter was somebody's garage. It was a house with a garage with 6 beds in it.
Wow.
The place smelled like a bar because whoever was there was a drinker and a smoker, and it smelled just like you walked into a bar. And they wanted me to stay there in a community that was full with drugs and activities, right? And I was like, "It's no way I could stay here."
It sounds like a setup for failure.
Exactly. That's what it was. And so I went to this hearing and I told them, and one of the legislatures, after I got through explaining like where they sent me and what was happening, at the end of the hearing, she pulled me aside and she said, "I need you to give me that location. We need to go to that location. We need to find out how come state funds is paying for something like that." And sure enough, they shut it down. They pulled the funding. It was like, if you're going to send somebody to a shelter, it needs to be in a safe environment. You can't have, and then they said, you can't be in the company of another incarcerated or formerly incarcerated person.
Right.
At that time. But everybody who went there was coming out of jail and prison.
Right. And the parole conditions say you can't be around other people.
And I'm saying, like, where am I supposed to go?
Right.
The parole officer won't go to my daughter. My daughter had a brand new home in Long Island, 4-bedroom house, basement, upstairs, downstairs, and they wouldn't let me go live with her. So I finally got my sister to go with me to parole so that they can then verify her address, which she lived not too far from my daughter. But this was on Long Island, and Long Island had absolutely no resources. But the program told me, if you move back into the city of New York and get off of Long Island, we'll support you. And so I did. I wound up sleeping on my friend's couch for about 6 months until I could actually get my footing.
That's a good
And,
friend.
and we're still friends today. We're still friends today. We basically grew up together from teenagers, right?
You mentioning that friend highlights something that's important, I think, for people coming out of prison, which is having, pro-social support, people that can tie you to resources, people that's going to hold you down.
Exactly. And that is what's so much needed. And that's why I really appreciate like some of the women who I came up with and came home with really got themselves grounded.
Yeah.
Started to build these reentry homes so that women coming out can have a fresh start in a positive place.
Right on. Right on.
And so that's where a lot of us journeyed through. My journey was really kind of helping them navigate the political aspect of getting the funding, like making sure that the places that they were getting was safe and that people could actually come and go and that they got the resources that they need.
Yeah.
So long story short, here I am 20 years later. I've been in the policy arena. I've sat at tables with people writing policy, sharing my experiences, really looking at what it is we want to see changed. How do we really want to make sure that folks are getting the resources in the communities and in the prisons, right? Because a lot of the policy work that I did changed the dynamic of how people are treated in prison.
Right.
And one of the things that was really important was pregnant women. The things they did to our pregnant sisters was just horrifying.
I can only imagine. So
Just
sorry, but can you just talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges, most significant challenges you might have faced, like working on policy or advocacy work up to date?
So the most significant challenges was the pushback from the Department of Corrections and their unions. And then some of our rural community politicians, right, who know that without these prisons in their communities, that their constituency would be on unemployment or on farms, honestly, right? Because that's where all of our prisons are built on farmland, out of sight, way up in the mountains, right? And so the challenge was really getting people to see me, one, as a person, two, as somebody who had lived experience and could talk to the issues, could talk about the trauma, could talk about the impact, and really believing that I'm not only carrying my traumas, but I'm carrying the traumas of those I left behind. And so these are the stories that I brought with me when I went to our electeds, right? These are the stories and the people, right? And I brought their names, but I never gave them their identifying information because of the level of retaliation within our systems.
And we know it's heavy.
And so when I started really working, I wound up working with the Correctional Association, right? Like they do prison monitor, and they refused to let me back into, especially the women's prison, because they know I knew the women, and they knew that they're gonna tell me the truth. They'll be afraid to talk to some of the other folks who they know haven't been inside, but they will talk to me. And that's when I really started to get to see really that there was no change. From when I left in 2004 to 2014, when I started going back in with the Correctional Association, that they were still doing the same things to the women. They were still treating them and like they were not human, right?
I want to point to something because you just hit it. You said like they're still treating them horrible, still treating women like they're not human. And earlier when we started, you talked about trauma and you mentioned trauma again. And we know that trauma is a common denominator for many of us, men and women who are incarcerated. And you also mentioned, not only your trauma that you're still carrying, but the trauma of other people. So it's like, how do you care for yourself and maybe sustain your spirit because you have like such strong spirit? How do you take care of yourself with all this trauma, vicarious trauma, your own trauma? We never really shake that. We learn to deal with it, but how do you
So for me, it is just sometimes taking time for myself. Just there's times like if I wasn't on this call with you right now, I'll be walking through San Jose County. That's where I am. I'm in San Jose, California right now, going out to do some other kind of training, to do some work to really help people who become involved in the legal system, right? I try to get it at the front end. And so I love to walk. Like my 5 prayers really, really help me. Like I get up in the morning, I make my fajr. You know what I'm saying? As I go through my day, sometimes I might not have time to make my middle prayers, but I try not to miss Isha, right? Before I go to bed, I make that prayer, right? And that kind of, it brings me calmness, soothes me, right?
That's all right.
And then just really thinking about traveling. I like to travel. Right. And so that I can travel now because I've been off parole for a couple of decades now, I can go anywhere I want to. Right. And so I plan travels and I do stuff like that just to spend some time with me. I love the ocean. Anytime I can get to the ocean, I do. Right. And it doesn't matter what state I'm in. Like wherever I'm at, if there's an ocean, I'm going to make a day and just go there and relax. Right. I love it. I love it. It's so tranquil, right? And so I do things like that. Like I'll do a spa day for myself in the middle of the week sometime. And especially when stuff is getting rough. Like New York has been on fire. And we have been doing a lot of work around advocacy and talking to the legislatures and fighting against the Department of Corrections. But in that, I've taken time to just do me.
Right. Can you talk a little more about your work in New York, like what you're doing? I know, but people that will be listening to this won't know.
So right now, New York has passed a solitary law, right? 2022. The department has been fighting against us to implement it. However, the governor has done some work around it, like she shut down one of our supermaxes, which was designated for solitary confinement, where people were actually in there for decades, literally. Somebody we know was in there for 30 years. I mean, no real human contact, no outside contact, excuse me. And so we were able to get that prison shut down with this law. And so last year in December, but we have been telling our legislatures, pushing back against the Department of Corrections every time somebody dies, trying to get the cause of death so that the community could know how this individual died or individuals, because it's been hundreds over the years in our system who have died and without just cause. And so we actually saw on video a young man, Robert Brooks, being murdered. He was tortured. And we talk about torture in the sense that solitary confinement is one of the ways that they were torturing and killing people and nobody could see it because it was out of sight and out of mind.
That's right.
And then they tell you whatever, right? And so we actually witnessed this because someone body cam was on and they had to turn it over to the Attorney General of our state. They made it public. And so now there's an uproar because people want to know, how is this possible that they murdered this man while he was handcuffed and shackled? They literally beat him to death. And so when they were pursuing charges against the officers, and it was about maybe 14, I think like 12 officers and 2 civilian nurses that stood by and did absolutely nothing while they pummeled this man to death, right? So fast forward, they're getting ready to indict these officers and the rest of these folks, and the whole system of officers walked off the job. It caused an illegal strike. It wasn't promoted, they said, by the union, so they didn't have the right to strike. They just walked off the job, which actually left every incarcerated person in a solitary confinement state, right? Because everybody's locked in. There's no movement. We lost 12 people to medical neglect, to suicide. They were locked in for more than 72 hours without any access to food, water, medical attention, medication, anything, before the governor brought in the National Guard. And they were only supposed to be there to provide meals and get people to and from medication or whatever, right? However, they took a young man out for a shower, and because he had been locked in so long, he was like, I'm not going back in that cell. He started to decompensate, and they didn't know what to do. They called what supposed to have been the emergency, I forgot what they called them, but we call them the boom squad, right? Officers who were supposed to be on strike, but was outside the prison striking. They called them inside, and they literally beat this young man to death. But it wasn't caught on body cam, right? So there's 2 deaths in less than 2 months, right? That we know were because of the brutality that our officers are actually causing on incarcerated people. So we've been doing this work to kind of stop this, to really push them to actually do what they're supposed to do and treat people humanely. So the striking officer says, we won't go back to work because our prisons are unsafe. But there's not been a death of an officer in over 30 years. Right?
And so
we don't even know how. We don't know how she died. They said she was beat by an incarcerated person to death, but we don't know that because there's no video. Right?
Absolutely. And we can't trust what they tell us.
We do know, we see on video, right? We want you to repeal the whole solitary law and allow us to continue people in solitary for decades at a time.
That doesn't make sense.
How is that when you have never even attempted to try to use the law and the alternatives that we know have worked in other places, right? We've given them all the avenues and folks that could actually help build out programming for alternative use versus solitary confinement and just isolating people and leaving them to die. Right. So this has been our fight. So we've been doing some work around keeping the governor from adding into our state budget solitary confinement repeals, because she could do something like that. So that's one of the things we're fighting against. The other thing is we're focused on like the upstate rural counties where the legislatures are actually doing something called resolutions to actually help the department repeal the law. But we've been, I'm not say steadfast and on point, and we have a statewide coalition.
Right.
We have people across our state that started calling their elected saying, if you don't vote no, we're voting no for you.
And you know,
this is not what we want you to do.
I'm glad that you just went there, because I was going to ask you next, how can people support the efforts to end solitary confinement in New York?
So we actually are in the process right now of pushing for the full implementation. So if folks are in New York, they need to know that on May 5th, we will be at the Capitol. We'll be talking to legislatures. We'll really be pushing what we call our Rights Behind Bars bill. But we're also, in that bill, it talks about fully implementing the whole solitary law, because it's a law. If I go out here and do something and break the law, I become incarcerated. We become incarcerated. It is breaking the law and not being held accountable. And this is what we're pushing for: accountability, right? The stopping of the brutality, right? The restoring of just basic human rights, packages, visits, mail. Like they're opening our mail and scanning it and then giving it to us. You don't never see a card from your loved one with their signature. The photos, you don't see them. They scanning them and putting them on a tablet for you to look at. Like, give me my materials. Those are the things that kept me going when I was inside, especially for people like me who didn't get many visits. The letters, the cards, the packages, that really made my day when I was inside.
Anisa, let me share this. I remember once somebody wrote me a letter. I kept the letter in my pocket for almost 6 months until it started falling apart, just to say how much I understand how important it is to receive something from your people, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, and that helps us hold it together.
And when I was in, the phone calls were so expensive.
They still
Right?
are.
We actually fought to remove the phone company that was charging the family members because everything was collect. You had to call collect.
Yeah,
The family members was paying so much,
yeah, I
right?
know.
And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
Mhm.
Like, I can't call home every day. I got to call home twice a month. I was good.
Yeah,
Right? But it didn't do what it needed to do because I
absolutely.
really needed to see and feel and touch, especially my child.
And
So these are the things.
I'm sorry, but you're talking about,
No.
solitary confinement and not having that human touch. That just touches on that. But hey, this has been great. Just having this conversation with you, and just you talking it, you've touched on a lot of the points that I was going to take you to, but you just took me there anyway. So that was great. But one last thing I want to ask,
Thank you.
two last things really, is what gives you hope in this work and how can people follow up and contact you if they want to help you?
What gives me hope is that I wake up every morning.
Alhamdulillah.
That's my hope. When I wake up every morning, I know that I have the strength and the energy to keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And so I am on Facebook, Instagram. I don't have Twitter, but you can reach me at Anisa, Anisah 613 at gmail.com or A Sabur, Sabur at unlocktheboxcampaign.org. And I'm here. I really hope that people who are incarcerated know that there is people out here fighting for your freedom from all angles of this planet.
That's right. That's right. Anisa, it's been a pleasure having you on this platform with me today. In our last minute, is there anything that you want to say to anybody or anything before we sign off?
All over the country. No new women's prisons. No new women's prisons. We don't want prisons in our cities, our states, and in this country. And we need to abolish incarceration all over.
Right on.
Yeah.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
Right on. Hey, sis, it's been great. I'll be seeing you hopefully next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
Next week.
for
Stay
next
well,
week.
brother.
Inshallah. And stay safe out
Inshallah.
there in California.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Peace.
Peace.
Hey, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Prison to Promise podcast, please contact me at Dr. Craig Waleed at gmail.com. I'll spell it out. That's DrCraigWaleed as in Edward, D as in David, at gmail.com. Dr. Craig Waleed, DrCraigWaleed at gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the Prison to Promise podcast. I look forward to hearing back from you. Peace.